This is a Fox News Alert. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. We have several breaking stories tonight, including a long-awaited endorsement for Donald Trump by an opponent who chose not to do so at the Republican convention. President Obama follows through on his threat to veto the 9/11 bill, setting him up for a high-stakes showdown with Congress. The Hillary Clinton email investigation is back in the news tonight as we learn 5 people, including Clinton's former chief of staff, were granted immunity in that case, and just moments ago, the FBI released 200 pages of interview summaries from the Clinton email investigation and a late Friday evening document dump. And in North Carolina, the wife of a black man shot to death by police in Charlotte is providing us with a first look at the video of his death. But we begin tonight with chief political correspondent Carl Cameron and a surprising endorsement from Trump's former rival, Senator Ted Cruz. Carl.
Hi, Brett. And this really came together and has been in the works for at least the last 2 weeks. Senator Ted Cruz met with Republican running mate Mike Pence in D.C. on the 13th of this month. And he discussed at that time how he'd publicly say he would keep his pledge to support the Republican nominee. And Cruz actually specifically asked that Senator Mike Lee of Utah be added to Trump's list of potential Supreme Court picks. Cruz's refusal to endorse Trump at the primetime debate, at the convention in Cleveland a couple months ago was something of a fiasco. And Cruz said then it was because Trump had insulted his wife and his father. Cruz came around today hailing Lee's inclusion on Trump's release of a final list of potential Supreme Court picks, 21 of them, in fact, approved by both the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. Cruz today wrote on Facebook that, quote, 6 key policy differences inform my decision. First and most important, the Supreme Court. For anyone concerned about the Bill of Rights, free speech, religious liberty, the Second Amendment, the court hangs in the balance. Trump was off the trail prepping for Monday's debate and issued a statement today saying, quote, I'm greatly honored by the endorsement of Senator Cruz. We fought the battle and he was a tough and brilliant opponent. I look forward to working with him for many years to come in order to make America great again. Cruz made his decision largely because he sees Trump as the last thing standing between Hillary Clinton and the White House, though he did not use the word endorse. He said he would vote for Mr. Trump. Aides to both Trump and Cruz say that's exactly what it was. Brett?
Carl Cameron outside Trump Tower. Carl, stand by if you would. We'll talk debate in just a minute. Now to North Carolina, where the wife of the black man shot by police has released video she recorded the day her husband died. The video comes out as Charlotte police continue to refuse to release dash and body cam video of the shooting death of Keith Scott. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is in Charlotte tonight with what we're learning from this eyewitness video and the fallout in the community. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening, Brett. The video is disturbing and leaves many questions unanswered. You never see a weapon, but you hear Charlotte police telling Keith Scott repeatedly to drop his gun, and then multiple shots are fired.
This video, recorded by the wife of Keith Lamont Scott, captures her desperate pleas with police not to shoot and for her husband to cooperate. After repeated warnings from officers to drop the gun, multiple shots are fired. The shooting sparked a third night of demonstrations in uptown Charlotte. This time, there was no blatant looting or vandalism, in part because of additional security provided by hundreds of Army National Guard troops and state police, called in after the governor declared a state of emergency. Tear gas was deployed when one group tried to shut down a stretch of I-277, and Charlotte's midnight curfew will remain in effect through the weekend, forcing cancellations and closures.
There are some businesses that have made decisions not to operate on their normal hours. If folks are attending an event or going to a business, they should check beforehand.
Dozens were arrested during violent rioting Tuesday and Wednesday, and one man in the crowd was shot and killed, reportedly by a fellow protester. This morning, Charlotte police arrested a suspect in that murder. Thursday night, marchers called for the release of police body cam and dash cam video of Scott's death, an African-American man killed by a black officer. It was shown to family members late yesterday, and after their viewing, their attorney released a statement saying while police did give him several commands, he did not aggressively approach them or raise his hands at members of law enforcement at any time. It is impossible to discern from the videos what, if anything, Mr. Scott is holding in his hands. When he was shot and killed, the family says, Mr. Scott's hands were by his side, and he was slowly walking backwards. The police chief says any decision to release the footage is now in the hands of the State Bureau of Investigation, and it does not tell the whole story.
One piece of evidence will never, ever make a good case. I know the expectation that video footage can be the panacea, and I can tell you that is not quite the case.
This evening, local media citing police sources report a gun found at the scene was loaded with Scott's DNA, blood, and fingerprints on it. Tonight, authorities brace for yet more protests. Meanwhile, businesses have closed, events and concerts have been canceled, and the economic fallout from the impact of this shooting continues to climb. Brett?
Rick Leventhal live in Charlotte. Rick, thank you. The FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email setup is now closed. But scrutiny around the arrangement is renewed tonight as we learn Clinton's former chief of staff, Cheryl Mills, was given limited immunity in exchange for her cooperation in the now closed FBI investigation. The news that 5 key players, including Clinton aides, got this immunity is infuriating some on Capitol Hill. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris joins us now with more. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. Reporters pressed the White House today on the number of deals and whether the president continues to have faith in the FBI and its investigation.
The president's got a lot of confidence in the ability of senior officials at the FBI to make decisions based on their judgment, not on the politics.
The Republican chairman of the House Government Oversight Committee is traveling and told Fox by phone. The FBI shared the documents this morning that show 5 people, including Clinton's chief of staff, Cheryl Mills, got limited immunity deals from the Justice Department. Mills got her deal in exchange for FBI access to her computer.
I'm losing faith at a rapid pace in the FBI. I thought this was going to be a serious investigation, but the way they handed out immunity agreements, the fact that they let Hillary Clinton's chief of staff to be also a witness, an immunity recipient, and sit in on Hillary Clinton's interview is just shameful.
The remaining deals went to Clinton IT specialist Brian Pagliano, who set up the server, Clinton aide Heather Samuelson, who sorted through the emails, deciding what was government business and what could be destroyed, Paul Combetta of Colorado-based Platte River Networks, who used BleachBit technology to electronically shred the Clinton email archive despite a preservation order, and the State Department's John Bentel silenced subordinates, voicing concern about Clinton's email practices. The Clinton campaign released a lengthy statement accusing congressional Republicans of overblowing the issue. It reads in part, "This kind of agreement is not at all unusual in an inquiry such as this, and it came after these aides had already given full interviews to the investigators." And a federal judge said today that the majority of emails recovered by the FBI investigation, several thousand pages, won't be released until after the election, Brett.
And Catherine, it was 5 o'clock on a Friday. This is always a time to look at the email because it's often a time for a document dump. And now the FBI has another one.
That's right, Brett. We have some of the email documents right here. And today at 5:36 p.m., the FBI posted on their website nearly 200 pages of 302s. That's the code the FBI uses for interview summaries. I've looked through some of them, and it's clear that they're low-level individuals within the State Department whose names are redacted for privacy reasons. We've asked the FBI who authorized the release on a Friday and who sanctioned the time of this release, Brett, but it would not go to the FBI's stated position that they want to be ultimately transparent in their findings.
Okay, we'll head back if you find anything. Catherine, thank you. The candidates are off the campaign trail today, perhaps choosing instead to focus on preparing for Monday's first of 3 presidential debates. The 90-minute showdown will be the first time Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump face each other on the same stage. It will focus, we're told, on 3 topics. Pretty vague, though. America's direction, achieving prosperity, and keeping America safe. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Correspondent Jennifer Griffin, and we bring back Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron following the candidates. I'll have more on how they spent the day in just a bit. But we begin with correspondent Doug McKelway, who has a look at what the candidates are doing to prepare for this debate. Good evening, Doug.
Evening, Brett. And with 100 million people expected to watch Monday night's debate, the debate would fall only 14 million viewers short of the highest-rated Super Bowl in history. The anticipation fueled by the nation's first female nominee versus a non-politician whose unpredictability is matched only by the restlessness of voters who are seeking change. For both candidates, Monday night's debate is uncharted territory. The format calls for 90 minutes of one-on-one with no breaks in which to study, to powder up, or to rest. That's a challenge for each.
He's never participated in a debate exactly like this. During the primaries, the fewest number of candidates that there were on any stage was 4. They had as many as 10 most of the time, and so that ended up not being really a debate, but a set of serial news conferences.
I kind of liken it to a band that's a one-hit wonder. They've got one song that you know really well, you love that song, but then when you go to their concert, you want to find out if they've got any other music that you actually like.
For the pneumonia-recovering Clinton, there is the threat of a coughing fit or of too much wonkiness.
You can become trapped in the briefing book, as I like to describe it.
The more that she emphasizes those qualities, the more she sounds like the status quo. And this is not a year where the American people want to keep going down the same track.
It's a liability her running mate has obliquely acknowledged.
Hillary Clinton does not need to know one more fact.
The two are preparing in ways that differ as much as their personalities. Trump will be studying Sunday at home with RNC chairman Reince Priebus. He has no sparring partner and is not telegraphing his strategy.
You know, if she comes out swinging, he's certainly somebody who will never back down. You know, if she's nice and respectful, you know, he can be incredibly charming as well.
Clinton has an unnamed sit-in mimicking Trump's different styles. Should Trump attack, Clinton might be wise not to counterpunch, as Senator Marco Rubio did during the GOP primary.
And you know what they say about men with small hands?
That backfired, sealing Rubio's fate.
I think any other politician who tries to compete with name-calling with Donald Trump is not going to have a very good experience.
But aggression towards Clinton poses its own risk. New York Senate candidate Republican Rick Lazio found out in 2000 when he stepped from behind the podium to wag his finger at Clinton. It became the debate narrative, an aggressive male intimidating a female candidate, and helped Clinton in the seat. Lazio says that he would advise Trump that there are actually 2 debates, the actual debate and then the spin afterwards. Lazio thought he won that first debate, but neglected to properly staff the spin room with surrogates while Clinton had a room full of them. The narrative took shape, and the rest is history. Brett?
All right, Doug, thank you. We'll be there in Hofstra, of course. Let's turn now to what the candidates have been doing to prepare today. Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following the Clinton campaign from Chappaqua, and we bring back Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron outside Trump Tower. Good evening again to you, Carl, and good evening, Jennifer. Carl, let's just start with you about Trump's strategy debate-wise.
Well, it's pretty small. It's pretty clever. The idea is to answer questions with aspirations. What are his goals? What does he want to do with any particular policy issue? Be positive, be presidential, be quick about it, and then pivot to the current state of affairs on whatever that issue is, and point out where the shortcomings are. Then pivot yet again and blame Clinton. That's the strategy. He has to be presidential. He's not going to look to pick fights, but he wants to make sure that he defines her in the early parts of the debate when voters and viewers are most attentive.
Jennifer, what do you hear from the Clinton campaign on the preps over there?
Well, there's an element of psychological warfare taking place, Brett. We had a 25-minute conference call with the campaign today, and they rolled out what they have put together, which is 19 pages, they say, of Donald Trump's lies with fact checks attached. They are calling it the 7 deadly lies of Donald Trump, and they are saying that they want the moderator, Lester Holt, to fact check him in real time. They say what moderators in the past have not do, a clear reference to the Matt Lauer Commander-in-Chief Forum, is they didn't fact check him. They said Hillary Clinton will be fact checking, but they call on reporters to be fact checking. Another part of that psychological warfare, we understand that billionaire Mark Cuban will be their guest, sitting in the front row, cheering Clinton on or encouraging her. And of course, he is a rival of Donald Trump. They are really looking for ways to get under his skin before the debate.
But Jennifer, we don't know if Mark Cuban was the stand-in for the Trump practice, do we?
It is the best kept secret of this campaign since the vice presidential pick. They will not say who the person is who's standing in. We don't know if it was Mark Cuban, but we do know it was one person, and they were preparing Hillary Clinton for 2 different Donald Trumps, an aggressive Trump and a coy, genteel
And quickly,
Donald
Carl,
Trump.
how much detail in policy do you think Donald Trump gets into?
Not very much. As I say, he's going to set his goals and priorities and try to avoid the details. And he didn't do any of the mock-up rehearsals with a sparring partner. He's had a steady stream of advisors talking with him. He's been going over briefing books, watching old tapes of Hillary's performances. This isn't going to be anything like the 17-person debates he was in earlier in the year, and they recognize that. So he's obviously looking for opportunities to let Clinton's personality and what many critics say is a kind of a weak campaigner and a lack of charisma come out, while he shows that he's going to be strong and leader-like.
It'll be fascinating. Carl and Jennifer, thank you both. As expected, today, President Obama vetoed a bill that would allow families of 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia. The White House says the decision was made by putting principles before politics, but it's also setting up a showdown, a high-stakes showdown between the administration and Congress. Correspondent Kevin Corke is at the White House tonight with the latest here. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening to you, Brett. Spot on. Keep in mind, congressional lawmakers, especially in the House, who overwhelmingly approve JASTA, have made it clear that they intend to contest this, and they have plans, at least right now, of making the first veto override of this president during the Obama presidency. Let me share just part of the statement that the president released this afternoon. As you pointed out, no surprise that he was going to reject JASTA, as you pointed out, on principled grounds. Essentially what the argument is that JASTA would open up America and Americans abroad, diplomats, service personnel, and others, to potential frivolous lawsuits that might accuse the U.S. of taking part in terrorism. The statement reading in part this afternoon, I have deep sympathy for the families of the victims of the terrorist attacks of September 11th who have suffered grievously. My administration therefore remains resolute in its commitment to assist these families in their pursuit of justice and do whatever we can to prevent another attack in the United States. Enacting JASTA, again, that's what it's called, Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. Enacting JASTA into law, however, would neither protect Americans from terrorist attacks nor improve the effectiveness of our responses to such attacks. The JASTA would be detrimental to U.S. national interest more broadly, which is why I am returning it without my approval. One more nugget, and I think this will be very important for the folks at home, Brett. Congressional lawmakers, even Democrats, have been virtually unanimous in their support, at least publicly, that JASTA should go forward. Give the families a chance to sue the Saudi government, for example, if it's proven that that government was behind the attacks of September 11th. But, of course, the vote counting continues even at this late hour. We'll see if congressional lawmakers have the numbers to override this veto.
Yeah.
Brett?
It'll be fascinating if it comes together next week, and whether the bill, there's an attempt to change it in Congress to somehow give the president some leeway here, but we'll follow it all. Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Up next, evidence of an Obama administration rush to give citizenship to immigrants that could be tied to the election. We first brought you that last night. Let's tell you what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where the nation's oldest full-time park ranger is headed to Washington. Betty Reed Soskin guides tours at the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in Richmond, California. She turned 95 Thursday, and as one of her gifts, she was given an early tour of the brand new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. We'll give you a sneak peek of that in just a bit. Fox 23 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where an autopsy finds that the man shot and killed by a police officer last Friday died of a gunshot wound to the chest. The medical examiner released Terrence Crutcher's preliminary autopsy results today. Toxicology results are still pending. The officer who shot him, Betty Shelby, turned herself in this morning on first-degree manslaughter charges and has been released on a $50,000 bond. And this is a live look at Detroit from our affiliate Fox 2. The big story there tonight, flags are at half-staff to honor the memory of Detroit Police Sergeant Ken Steele. Family members gathered today for the officer's funeral. He was shot in the shoulder while chasing a suspect last week and died unexpectedly of a blood clot. Suspect is charged with first-degree murder in that case. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Another possibility tonight that the Northeast bombing suspect slipped through the cracks of federal authorities. A Department of Homeland Security official tells Fox News that Ahmad Rahami was questioned by Customs in March of 2014 upon his return to the U.S. from a 13-month trip to Pakistan. Customs then sent that information on to the FBI. Just months later, Rahami's father would report him to the FBI, saying he was a possible terrorist. Speaking to the Associated Press, Rahami's father said his son underwent a personality change after visiting Afghanistan and Pakistan. Last week's bombings in New York and New Jersey injured 31 people. Rahami remains hospitalized. A story now we first brought to you last night. An internal Obama administration email shows immigration officials could literally be working overtime to swear in as many new citizens before November as possible. Senior correspondent Adam Housley reports on whether the administration is trying to stack the votes this election season.
The Department of Homeland Security is being accused of an election year immigration push that could create thousands of new voters. In a letter written by Republican Senators Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Chuck Grassley of Iowa, addressed to DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, the senators question a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services email sent to the Houston field office, encouraging staff to work overtime, including weekends, saying in part, quote, "The field office, due to the election year, needs to process as many of their N-400 cases as possible between now and fiscal year 2016. On the campaign trail in Wisconsin, Senator Johnson says the maneuver is very suspicious.
If they're starting to prioritize citizenship prior to an election, it tells you something. I think you can make certain assumptions. You know, other applications for other types of visas and the other things that USCIS processes are going to be lower priority.
Retired ICE Special Agent Claude Arnold goes a bit further.
New citizens tend to vote Democrat, and you know, that's the motivation for doing this. It's politically motivated.
In response to the senator's letter and inquiries from Fox News, USCIS released a statement reading in part, quote, USCIS anticipated that there would be a spike in applications this year, as we usually see in an election year, but the increase in N-400 applications has exceeded expectations. USCIS has detailed staff to offices experiencing increased workloads and has authorized overtime for many offices. This comes just days after the revelation that poor management of fingerprint records allowed hundreds of people to wrongfully obtain citizenship despite documented risks and deportation orders.
It really does make you wonder, what is their priority, when I believe their priority should definitely be national and homeland security.
Johnson and Grassley point out this last happened during the re-election of Bill Clinton in 1996. Back then, a congressional investigation found that more than 180,000 applications were approved without any fingerprint checks. 80,000 of those had criminal records. Brett?
Adam, thank you. A computer hacker who essentially gave ISIS a hit list of government employees was sentenced to 20 years in prison today. Ardit Farizi, a native of Kosovo, is the first person convicted in the U.S. of both computer hacking and terrorism charges. He admitted to hacking a private company and pulling out the names of about 1,300 people with .gov and .mil addresses. The Islamic State then published the names with a threat to attack. At today's sentencing, the 20-year-old said he was sorry for what he did. Syrian government forces continue to drop bombs on rebel-held districts in Aleppo after an effort to salvage a U.S. and Russian-backed ceasefire has failed. Residents and activists say the bombing has been unprecedented, targeting residential areas and civil defense centers. A human rights group said at least 27 civilians, including 3 children, were killed in about 30 raids over the past couple of days. 15 years after the 9/11 attacks, coalition forces are still on the hunt for al-Qaeda leaders. That according to the top commander in Afghanistan. Army General John Nicholson also said today the Taliban controls about 10% of the country's population, and at least another 25% is being contested by insurgents and Afghan forces. Now back to the election. Immigrants and retirees could be a big factor in November's election in the battleground state of Florida. Key battleground. Right now, the Real Clear Politics average of polls shows Trump with just about 1/10 of a percentage point lead in the Sunshine State. Correspondent Phil Keating reports from Florida tonight on the 2 voting groups that could decide who gets the state's 29 electoral votes in November.
Show of hands, who's voting for Donald Trump?
In battleground swing state Florida,
I'm voting for Hillary.
the stage is set for another tense election night. And in this tight race, two groups look to play a critical role: Hispanics and white retirees.
Life in the villages.
June Penfold is one of the state's growing number of newly retired arrivals in Florida's largest retirement community, the Villages, where trumped-out golf carts spin through the old-timey main square.
I'm voting for Donald Trump because I do believe that he can stop the terror in the United States. He can vitalize the economy. He can make America great again.
Well, I'm voting for Donald Trump. I cannot vote for Hillary Clinton.
Trump's strength with Florida's older white voters is being countered in Central Florida's I-4 corridor,
Good afternoon. Thank you for calling Zazone.
where Jennifer Maid just opened her Latin Cafe.
I'm voting for Hillary because I'm all about the women power. I'm all about women doing changes, and I believe that us women are very important, and I know that she can be one of the presidents that will make changes. Would you like to register?
Florida's seen a surge of nearly 300,000 Hispanics in the past 3 years, many of whom are Puerto Ricans. Mi Familia Vota, a national civic association, said it has already registered nearly 30,000 voters this year.
No matter how you slice it, Florida gives a big advantage to whoever wins it.
University of Miami's Joe Yasinski offers this formula for victory.
Trump needs to go after older Cubans because that's where he's going to have a strong advantage over Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton is going to have to target non-Cuban and younger Cuban voters where she has an advantage.
And voter turnout will be crucial.
Exactly how tight is Florida? Well, as a rule, extremely. In the past 3 elections, that's 2 governor's races and the 2012 presidential race, the winner has won with just 1% of the vote all 3 times. Brett?
Phil Keating at the Villages in Florida. Phil, thank you. I think that's America's friendliest hometown. The markets closed the week in the red. The Dow lost 131, the S&P 500 12, the Nasdaq lost 34. For the week, each of the 3 markets rose for the second straight week. The Dow was up 0.8 of a percentage point. The S&P and the Nasdaq both went up 1.2%. The first museum dedicated to African American history will officially open Saturday in Washington, D.C. And today, President Obama welcomed the news.
This is about people who, for more than a century, advocated and organized and raised funds and donated artifacts so that the story of the African American experience could take its rightful place in our national memory.
President Obama is, of course, featured at the new Smithsonian Museum, along with exhibits on slavery, the Civil War, and pop culture. I got a chance to get a sneak peek last night, and then I talked about the opening with the museum's Associate Director for Curatorial Affairs, Dr. Rex Ellis. So this has been a long time coming. How long?
100 years. It began 1915 when Civil War soldiers were just wondering what could take place that would be a memorial to the memory of the work and the experiences of African Americans during the Civil War. It started, it stopped, it started, it stopped. They created this document called The Time Has Come. And it was a document that was impressive enough that it convinced President George W. Bush to sign in legislation in 2003.
What does it mean, do you think, for African Americans, but also for this country to have this?
It means that the African American journey is now a part of the nation's master narrative. It is now a part of the story that is told to everyone who wants to understand what it means to be American.
You see the images and through the windows, a lens of the Washington Monument and the White House, but through the prism of the African American experience, if you will.
Absolutely right. We have a variety of things that is a point counterpoint that helps visitors understand that African Americans have been a part of the discussion of what the Constitution means.
It stands as a contrast even in its the way it's formed and its color on the mall. It's interesting to see an aerial of the museum itself.
The design of the museum, we hope, suggests resiliency, suggests uplift, and that sculptural design, which creates the sort of corona that we call for the museum, is an homage to black craftsmen that used ironwork as an aesthetic craft to create art as well as function.
What other key elements are there in the museum that you would point somebody to?
We're proud of this 76-ton railroad car. Visitors will have an opportunity to actually go to the train and go through the train so that they can see how the train was sort of redesigned in the 1940s to show a side that was segregated. It's about learning, but it's also about looking at with your own eyeballs Harriet Tubman's hymnal. Looking with your own eyes at her shawl that was a gift of Queen Victoria, to look at Nat Turner's Bible. It's seeing history up close and personal. This experience is one that I believe no matter who they are or what background they come from, they're going to find a bit of themselves in the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Having been there, check it out if you're in Washington, D.C., the newest museum on the National Mall. 5 immunity deals granted in the investigation over Hillary Clinton's private email setup. That, plus all the day's news. Our panel weighs in on the optics next.
Stand and speak and vote your conscience. Vote for candidates up and down the ticket who you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution.
He'll come and endorse over the next little while. He'll come and endorse because he has no choice.
Well, he did. Ted Cruz endorsing Donald Trump today, saying he will vote for him and he wants you to vote for him. In a Facebook post saying, after many months of careful consideration, of prayer, and searching my own conscience, I've decided that on Election Day I will vote for the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. He says he made that pledge. He's sticking to it. He finishes saying, our country's in crisis. Hillary Clinton is manifestly unfit to be president, and her policies would harm millions of Americans. And Donald Trump is the only thing standing in her way. A year ago, I pledged to endorse the Republican nominee, and I'm honoring that commitment. And if you don't want to see a Hillary Clinton presidency, I encourage you to vote for him. Now, on background, officials will tell you that one of the main reasons he did this was because of the move the Trump campaign made to expand the Supreme Court justice possibilities to include Senator Mike Lee, and the pledge that Donald Trump would only pick from the list that is expanded as of today. That includes Senator Mike Lee. The Trump response to the endorsement: I am greatly honored by the endorsement of Senator Cruz. We have fought the battle, and he was a tough and brilliant opponent. I look forward to working with him for many years to come in order to make America great again. Let's bring in our panel. Lisa Booth, columnist with the Washington Examiner. David Cannonade, senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report, and syndicated columnist Charles Kramer. Okay, David, I mean, obviously we could play soundbite after soundbite of these two going at it, especially towards the end. How big a deal is this?
I think it's a bigger deal for Ted Cruz's future than anything that will happen in this current cycle. Two things changed, I think, since Ted Cruz defied Donald Trump at his own convention until now, besides the Mike Lee ad, which I'm a little cynical about. The two things that I really think moved Ted Cruz is that he is in trouble in his home state of Texas in a re-election battle where he is now behind Rick Perry, if he were to challenge him in the Texas Senate primary, and tied with a Castro brother. The other thing that's happened is that Donald Trump is in a much better position to win the presidency now. So I think Cruz was always caught between a rock and a hard place, and for his future, for him to have a future in the Senate or to run for the White House again, he had to get on board.
Lisa, Mike Pence, vice presidential nominee, met with Cruz here in Washington, and apparently that's where this kind of deal started.
Well, I think another thing that happened as well was the backlash that Senator Cruz faced, particularly from one of his biggest donors, Robert Mercer. So I have to imagine that that might have helped move him along in this direction as well. Secondly, I think as Donald Trump improves in the poll, if he does improve in the polls, especially heading into Election Day, I think you'll see a lot more Republicans like Ted Cruz that were holding out potentially come and support Donald Trump. But this most certainly helps Donald Trump. Not only does it make him look strong in the sense that Senator Ted Cruz, who vehemently opposed him in his speech before the Republican convention or Republican National Convention, has now come around, but also helps him in his effort to try to coalesce the Republican base and support, which he's been struggling with.
You know, though the polls seem to have changed recently. Our state polls, some national polls now have it at 93, 94, 95% of Republicans saying they're certain they're going to vote for Donald Trump. So coalescing the conservative base, obviously a concern, but this helps with that.
It does help, but I think David's right. This is about Cruz much more than it is about Trump. And when he says it makes him a little cynical, I would have to say that that's an understatement. Should make you very cynical. I love the way that Cruz said after searching his conscience. Whenever a politician says he searched his conscience, you can assume it was a quick search of a very small space. Now, I'm not saying anything personal about Cruz, but remember, he and Trump were the outsiders, and what was their calling card from the very beginning? We don't act like the Washington insiders. We don't scratch each other's back. We speak our conscience, etc. Well, it turns out in the end that they do what you'd expect of any other candidates, which is why, I mean, I don't denounce them or deplore what they're doing here. This is business as usual, but weren't they the candidates who are against the business as usual? And I like Trump's line, his line where he says, we fought the battle. He was a tough and brilliant opponent. Well, at the time, he was a tough and lying opponent, and now apparently he's a brilliant opponent. This is politics. This is exactly what you'd expect, but it is not how they sold themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, we could play soundbite after soundbite from the primaries. I want to turn to this other story, and that is the immunity deal given to 5 people tied to the Clinton email investigation, including Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff, Cheryl Mills. Here's the House Government Oversight Committee chairman.
This is not a real investigation if you're handing out immunity agreements like candy. The fact that they let Hillary Clinton's chief of staff to be also a witness, an immunity recipient, and sit in on Hillary Clinton's interview is just shameful. Why is a witness interviewed by the FBI able to sit with Hillary Clinton during her interview? That's just, Lady Justice is just different for Hillary Clinton than it is everybody else.
And just to be clear, the DOJ gives this immunity at the beginning of this, and then obviously the FBI does not get to the place where they're going to prosecute.
And I think the real problem for people watching at home is that why would you have to give immunity to people if there is nothing to hide here? If everyone could come out and be transparent about the process, critics would say, well, why did immunity have to be granted? You know, Cheryl Mills is getting a lot of the press on this because she was the chief of staff. But this Brian Pagliano, who deleted the emails, that's the most fascinating. This is the guy that deleted the emails and then misled Congress about it. He initially said he didn't, then went back, had to change his testimony. So I feel like this guy really felt he was in hot water, and then he had to follow an order later on to use this special program, and poof, all the emails are gone.
So is the BleachBit guy, that he's on this list? And remember that these people don't have security clearance, and they were dealing with classified emails on this server. Lisa.
Well, I think it raises a whole host of questions, and particularly, too, these are going to be the folks that are going to serve with Hillary Clinton or administration if she becomes president of the United States. Cheryl Mills, Huma Abedin. And there's also increased scrutiny, or there should be increased scrutiny about Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin and what role they played, and the fact that you have Cheryl Mills and her work with the Clinton Foundation while serving at the Clinton Foundation, or Huma Abedin, who worked at the Clinton Foundation, the State Department, and Teneo as well. So it raises a lot of questions about that. It also puts Comey, FBI Director Comey, in the hot seat, who's coming before Congress next week, and sort of his dealings and his discretion and his investigation. It raises a lot of questions that I'm sure are going to be brought to the forefront next week.
Well, in fact, you know, Charles, late today, 5:30, we get another document dump from the FBI about these interviews, these 302 interviews. We're going through them to see what's in them. But this is a kind of a thing that happens, this document dump. It's traditional in Washington. But for the FBI to say they're being transparent in this investigation, that doesn't appear to be true.
Something ironic is happening. It's not just what you got used to a year of the drip, drip, drip for Hillary's reputation, for honesty, transparency, etc. But now that is happening to Comey's reputation. He came into this as a shining knight for what he had done in the Reagan years, especially if you do something that appears to be sort of against the conservative consensus. You get to be a Washington hero. But playing off that, everything that we have seen since the press conference where he said he wasn't going to prosecute makes you wonder what in God's name was going on. If the Watergate inquiry had been handled the way that this is, giving out immunity, allowing the witness, the sort of the co-conspirator, if you like, to act as the principal's lawyer, as Cheryl Mills was, it is truly scandalous. And because it's an election year and this is all going to be swept away, if she wins, nobody will remember it, and if she loses, nobody will care.
We'll see how much it's covered. It's a big story. Next up, the fight between Congress and the administration of the 9/11 bill and winners and losers. Focus at the White House today, the President Obama's 12th veto, this of the 9/11 bill called JASTA. Here's what's in the veto letter that comes along with the veto. I have deep sympathy for the families of the victims of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, who have suffered grievously. My administration, therefore, remains resolute in its commitment to assist these families in their pursuit of justice and do whatever we can to prevent another attack in the United States. Enacting this law, JASTA, into law, however, would neither protect Americans from terrorist attacks nor improve the effectiveness of our response to such attacks. The JASTA would be detrimental to U.S. national interests more broadly, which is why I'm returning it without my approval. The 9/11 families weighed in soon after that veto. We are outraged and dismayed at the president's veto of JASTA and the unconvincing and unsupportable reasons he offers as explanation. No matter how much the Saudi lobbying and propaganda machine may argue otherwise, JASTA is a narrowly drawn statute that restores long-standing legal principles that have enjoyed bipartisan support for decades. It will deter terrorism and hold accountable those nations that support and fund it. We're deeply grateful for the unanimous bipartisan support that JASTA has in Congress. We look forward to the Senate and the House fulfilling their commitments to quickly overriding this veto. That could happen next week. We're back with our panel. It would be, if as expected, the first override of a veto for President Obama.
Which would be ironic because I think he's right on this issue. I, too, of course, have sympathy with the families, but this is not the way to get redress. We have this obsession with legalism. This is a foreign policy, military issue, and the fact that so many of our former diplomats have said this is a mistake. And the reason is we are the foremost diplomatic power on earth. We have the most stakes, the most embassies, the most people working, operating abroad. They are going to be harassed. In the long run, this would be really detrimental.
Dave, this does not go along party lines. Senator Schumer, others, Nancy Pelosi, have said they're supporting the 9/11 families. Some Democrats are saying they can't do it.
Here's an issue where Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are united. They are against the president on this. But frankly, I mean, if you point to the foreign policy establishment, former defense secretaries, attorney generals, they're with Obama. And Obama rolled out William Cohen, the former Bush Attorney General, a lot of people that said, look, this is wrong because it sets a precedent of possible reciprocity, that Iraq could then pass a law and allow their citizens to sue us for crimes.
The family's attorneys dispute that, but in practice, there will be a something pushback overseas. Lisa.
Well, I think politically it looks bad for the Obama administration, essentially giving the appearance of siding with Saudi Arabia over the 9/11 victims, and it also could give Republicans their first win overriding the veto. But from a policy standpoint, I do think there are a lot of questions that have been raised, particularly by Chairman Thornberry, even today, circulating a letter to his Republican colleagues against JASTA and expressing the same concerns that Charles laid out, that David just laid out, as well as the administration has laid out. So I think it's sort of to be determined to see what happens with this.
We're going to follow it closely, and we'll keep track of the vote. Quickly, winners and losers. Charles.
Winner, Vladimir Putin and Bashar Assad. They commit an open, overt, out-and-out war crime, the bombing of convoys, bringing relief into Aleppo. They get away with it, and they are now, ceasefire is over, and they are now launching a final assault on the rebels in Aleppo, again, scot-free. My loser would be John Kerry for negotiating this deal, but he is retiring the trophy for loserdom, so I have to give it to somebody else. I give it to Barack Obama. His UN speech was really disappointing. It shows that after two terms, like the Bourbons, He learned nothing and he forgot nothing.
Winner then loser.
Winner, Senator Elizabeth Warren, for her savage grilling of the Wells Fargo CEO this week up on Capitol Hill. I think no matter what party you're in, I think it's good to see that occur, and I think it reignites interest in two dull topics, congressional hearings and the banking system. You can learn a lot from it. I urge people to watch that hearing. Loser, I would say, Ted Cruz, because he upset the Trump folks in his defiant speech at the Republican National Convention, which will be remembered, and now he's got his own people mad at him because of getting on board with Trump.
Winner then loser.
Winner is Zach Galifianakis, because I thought the interview was hilarious, and his question to Clinton about how he could reach her, is it email, was perfectly hilarious. Loser is the city of Charlotte right now, which is burning without the full results of the case being presented, without the facts of the case being out there, businesses being burned, and reports that 75% or 70% of those arrested have come from outside the city.
I will say that last night was a lot more calm than the previous two nights, and we'll see what happens tonight with the release of that video. Would you have something?
No.
Oh.
Just
I thought he was giving me
nodding
the
my
signal.
assent.
That's it for the panel, but when we return, your Friday feedback. Finally tonight, time for your Friday feedback. We asked if police in Charlotte, North Carolina should release that dash cam and body cam video of the officer-involved shooting. Scott Manetta says why this would set a bad precedent. It's not the general public's business. Let the pros do their jobs if they wish afterwards. Brenda says, Brett, I say release the video ASAP. Janet Sue Harris tweets, Brett Baer, yes, the camera doesn't lie. It will clear up matters. We also asked, is debate prep important? James Riley responds, depends on your level of confidence, but going in cold would be suicide. Tim Wolf, by now you either know it or you don't. Eileen Lendy says in all caps, very. Finally, on the president's veto of the 9/11 bill, should it in fact be made into law with an override of that veto? Rico Flashback tweets, support 9/11 families for sure, but there is a downside to this legislation. Linda says no, it's the wrong way to attempt to get justice. And Marilyn Lanzi asks, what good would it do? Thank you for weighing in for your Friday feedback. We do it every Friday. Don't forget, Sunday we head to Hofstra in New York before, yes, the big debate. We have two shows, two special reports on Sunday, 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. from Hofstra, previewing the debate. And then we have full coverage on Monday.